What is up, you guys? Time for controversial thoughts. Let's talk about it. So, I've gotten sent an article by Rhonda Patrick talking about new 5GC twice in the last couple of days. So, I figured I would just do a quick controversial thoughts about this and put it to rest before people get worried about this. I will show you Rhonda Patrick's article. Um, I think that in this one, Rhonda takes a pretty neutral stance, although she does make some claims that I would disagree with. But you can read that one at her website, Found My Fitness. Though, like I said, a couple of people sent me this and said, "What are your thoughts on new 5GC?" Well, the first thing I want to mention is that I talk about it in my book. So if you guys haven't read my book, The Carnivore Code, you should go pre-order it now, thecarnivorecodebook.com. There's a whole section about new 5GC in my book. There's a section about TMAO. There's a whole bunch on mTOR. I break it all down in this book. And as you can see here, I think new 5GC is not a cause for concern. And I will show you why. Again, this is a direct excerpt of my book, The Carnivore Code. You can get it at thecarnivorecodebook.com. It'll be out August the 4th, 2020 in the second edition. So what the heck is new 5GC? It's kind of a confusing term. It's a sialic acid. And perhaps the best way is just to rely on good old Wikipedia to tell you. So it is a 9-carbon sugar with an acid group attached here at the end. It looks a lot like something called new 5AC, which is a 9-carbon sugar backbone with a acetyl group on the end of this nitrogen. So the only difference between these two molecules, new 5AC and new 5GC, is this has a carbonyl group as opposed to an acetyl group attached to the nitrogen here on the carbon chain. Why do we care? These are sialic acid molecules. They are essentially glycoconjugates. They sort of have a sugar in them. They get added to proteins on the surface of our cells, which makes them glycoproteins. And those cell surface proteins are used for cell-to-cell signaling, and they're sometimes used by pathogens to enter the cell. What we know is that in humans, we lost the ability to synthesize new 5GC about 2 to 3 million years ago, when the enzyme that makes it, CMAH, was irreversibly mutated. So humans don't make new 5GC, but we do make new 5AC and a number of other sialic acids in the human body. Again, why do we care? Some have suggested that because humans don't make new 5GC and we eat foods that do have new 5GC, specifically red meat, ruminants, that we are being exposed to an immunologic trigger here. It's an interesting hypothesis. I don't think there's really any evidence to suggest this, and 3 million years of human evolution thriving, eating a heck of a lot of red meat would argue to the contrary, as well as a very nuanced point that I've never heard anyone else mention that I will talk about at the end of this video. So basically, the concern here is based on mouse studies. So mice make new 5GC. So how do you test for the possibility of new 5GC being bad in a mouse? Well, you have to do a knockout mouse, which means you have to make a mutated mouse and then knock out the ability to make new 5GC and then introduce new 5GC into that mouse and see what happens. This isn't really a good model to study it in humans. But what has been done in humans is we can look at people who have gotten a whole lot of new 5GC as part of a kidney transplant protocol. And in these people, we actually don't see any increase in cancer, which is one of the main concerns with new 5GC. So this is, again, a study that I reference in my book, The Carnivore Code. And you can see the title, No Increase in Colon Cancer Risk Following Induction with New 5GC Bearing Rabbit Anti-T Cell IgG in Recipients of Kidney Transplants. Basically, the idea here is that when you get a kidney transplant, part of the protocol is to use something called polyclonal rabbit IgG, meaning a rabbit immunoglobulin G that has lots of different immunoglobulins in it. And as part of that rabbit polyclonal IgG, you're going to get a bunch of new 5GC. So they compared 173,960 patients who did not get this ATG, this rabbit polyclonal IgG, which does elicit an immune response against this, to a group of patients who did receive rabbit polyclonal ATG. There were 38,000 of the latter group. And what did they say? We found no evidence that exposure to higher levels of anti-Neu5Gc is associated with a higher incidence of colon cancer. So this is in humans. We give people a whole bunch of Neu5Gc as part of this rabbit polyclonal IgG, and there is no increase in human colon cancer. So in humans, there's really never been a study showing that Neu5Gc or the antibodies that we generate against Neu5Gc, which are known as anti-Neu5Gc, are problematic. So what's all the fuss about? Well, really nothing. It's imagined. Let's think about this. Humans don't have Neu5Gc. We lost the ability to make it when we lost CMAH, the enzyme, 3 million years ago. If this had been a problem for us, we would have known long ago, and this mutation would have been highly unfavorable. It's basically not even tenable to make the argument that humans haven't been eating red meat as a majority of their diet or as a significant part of their diet for 3 million freaking years. If you've read my book, you'll know that I think personally is the thing that made us human, that allowed our brains to grow. Woolly mammoth, all of these things, these are all mammals. They all have Neu5Gc. Humans without Neu5Gc, the Homo genus, has been eating animals with Neu5Gc for 3 million plus years. Does it make any sense this would be a problem for us? No. What's the hubbub based on? Mouse studies which are contrived. Now, a very interesting point, which I again talk about in my book. There's another example that looks a lot like this that I talk about here. There's a group of animals called mustelids, ferrets, badgers, martens, and weasels, which are also carnivorous, and they lack Neu5Gc too. But they commonly consume other animals that do possess this molecule. So this is and there's a reference there for you guys if you want to look it up, but you got to get my book. This is mirroring what we see in humans, right? A non-Neu5Gc containing animal eating other animals that have Neu5Gc. Now, in humans, we don't absorb much of it. We excrete most of it. But the mustelids, the ferrets, the martens, the badgers, the weasels, these eat other animals that have Neu5Gc and have been doing so for millions of years. Are mustelids going extinct? Are the badgers, ferrets, martens, weasels getting rampant cancers? Doesn't look like it. We don't see wildlife biologists sounding the alarm here. So we see a very parallel situation in the animal kingdom that looks just like us. This is just more fear-mongering around red meat that is not based in any real evidence and should not dissuade you from eating red meat, the most nutritionally dense food on the freaking planet with the organs that go with it. So again, talk about this in my book. I talk about mTOR in my book. I talk about TMAO in my book. If you don't know what these things are, you can look back to my previous podcast, but I've gone to great lengths in my book. There's the first edition. The second edition is coming out August the 4th to debunk all of these myths as much as I possibly could and to show you that evolutionarily, it makes total sense for humans to be eating red meat. And you don't need to worry about these things, but understand the science behind so that when Rhonda Patrick writes an article and she's like, well, we don't know, you're just going to say, it doesn't make any sense, Rhonda. Go back to your broccoli sprouts because that's silly. So no disrespect to Rhonda. You guys all know that I respect her work. I think she's super smart. I just think that I disagree with her on most things these days, definitely about broccoli sprouts and so forth, which you can also learn about in the Carnivore Code. So www.carnivorecodebook.com. Check out my book, pre-order it. It's going to rock the world when it comes out August the 4th. Don't worry about Neu5Gc. Don't worry about TMAO. Don't worry about mTOR. I mean, be sensible, but Neu5Gc, not a cause for concern. Talk about it in my book. Check it out, you guys. Stay radical. That's today's controversial thoughts.